Welcome, everyone. This is our, I believe, 7th annual filmmaker panels here at Cleveland State University, where we do this in conjunction with the Cleveland International Film Festival, of which we are a platinum sponsor. I'm Kim Neuendorf. I'm a professor in the School of Communication here at Cleveland State. Among other things, I teach documentary form in film and television. Some of my students are crewing this. We're videoing this for posterity to put online. And I'm very excited to be moderating the first panel, which is on documentary filmmaking. We have a large panel, and I thank all of you. This was the popular panel. This was the one that people wanted to be on, so I really appreciate everyone participating. I hope you all know there are 3 other panels today, too, so feel free to come back and see them. Other panels are independent filmmaking. The next one after lunch is distribution, exhibition, and film festivals, and the final one is editing and post-production, so please come on back for those. We have people with assigned seating, as you can see, so you can see who they are and what films they're representing or what duty. And in the case of Jolene, she's on the documentary jury, although she also has been a documentary filmmaker, correct? Yeah. And I thought I would introduce each of them with a short bio, largely the ones you folks sent to me. So we'll go through and introduce everybody, but then I'll ask a couple questions, we'll have some discussion, then we will open it up to you folks for Q&A, for sure. At the far left, we have Matt Mamula. Matt is a graduate of yeah, and you can see, this is always fun because my students find a couple of slides usually to represent each of these. You can see well represented. Matt Mamula is here with the film at the festival Just About Famous, which I did get to see most of, and it's so much fun, very interesting. He's a graduate of the University of Central Florida in film and the UCLA Professional Program for Screenwriting. He co-directed the documentary short Just About Famous, which now has been turned into this feature that's showing at the festival. He produced the feature documentary Gridiron Girls about an all-women's full-contact football team. And he also directed and produced the short documentary Die Like an Egyptian about a 90-year-old who built his own Egyptian coffin. And he currently resides in Florida with his wife and kids.
That's right. That's good.
All right. Next on the panel is Liam McNiff, who is here showing the film he produced, Matt Shepard is a Friend of Mine, directed by Michelle Huswai.
Sure.
Is that right? Okay, thank you. Who's down here too and can help field some questions perhaps. Liam is originally from Massachusetts. He's a graduate of Wesleyan University. He started his film career in development at Propaganda Films. He's shifted his focus to digital post-production and currently has over a decade of post-production and indie producing experience under his belt. When he's not working on film projects, he edits reality TV in Los Angeles, and I have some ideas of things we could ask about there. Is it reality? Is it TV? Is it close even to documentary, our topic today? That'll be fun. And Matt Shepard is a friend of mine, is his feature producing debut, so welcome.
Thank you.
Next on tap is Michael Lee Nuremberg. His back issue is the Hustler magazine story. I did get a chance to see last night, and it's quite compelling, quite interesting. And actually a personal story. I think he'll tell you about that. It's kind of surprising. Did not know it was going to be a personal story going into it. He's an artist and filmmaker based in Brooklyn, New York. His works have exhibited at festivals and galleries throughout the world. This film is his feature-length directorial debut, and it says here, based on his father's experiences as creative director at Hustler magazine in the 1970s and 1980s. It'll be released this summer through Epix and simultaneously on outlets throughout the world, and he lives with his son Oliver in Brooklyn, New York.
All true.
Thank you. Next is Jolene Pinder, who is executive director of the New Orleans Film Society, the producers of the annual New Orleans Film Festival. Before returning to her southern roots, Jolene worked at New York City-based Arts Engine as a documentary film producer and director of the Media That Matters Film Festival. She was a producer and the DP, director of photography, of the feature-length documentary Asexual, which came out in 2011. And served as co-producer on the documentary Pushing the Elephant, which was broadcast on Independent Lens in 2010. After obtaining a BA in English Literature from the University of Chicago, Jolene graduated with a master's degree from the Documentary Institute at the University of Florida. While there, she directed the short film Miss Milla, very good, which went on to win the 2008 Student Emmy Award in the documentary category. So welcome, Jamie. Next is PJ Raval. He's at the festival as someone to watch, and so therefore has 2 films showing at the festival. His 2009 Trinidad, 2009, and his current release, Before You Know It, which I did get a chance to see, and it's amazing as well. He was named one of Out Magazine's Out 100 for the year 2010, and Filmmaker Magazine's 25 New Faces of Independent Film for 2006. PJ is an award-winning filmmaker whose credits include Trinidad, as I mentioned, which won the Best Documentary at the Cleveland Film Festival in 2009, and has been shown on Showtime. And the highly charged and not safe for work, I have to explain that later, Christine video collection. And then the latest documentary, Before You Know It, showing at the festival also, is follows the lives of 3 gay senior men as they face the challenges of life and love in their golden years. It won the Best Documentary at the Chicago LGBT Film Festival. So welcome, PJ. Jesse, I forgot to ask you, Raisler, thank you. Jesse Raisler is showing at the festival this year, The Starfish Throwers. He's an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker whose work is screened internationally in such venues as South by Southwest Film Festival and on Current TV. Jesse's approach to filmmaking is best described as cinematic authenticity. So we want to know what that means.
Sure,
Indeed, I did read this, by fusing narrative cinematic technique with the authenticity found in documentary-style filmmaking, his work blurs the line between fiction and nonfiction by capturing the truth in a conceptually thoughtful manner. So thank you for joining us.
Cool.
Thank you. And finally, Tracy Tragos is here showing at Festival Rich Hill. It's a powerful film about the profound and complicated feelings of loss caused by the deaths of American men in Vietnam, some 35 years later. The film is aired on PBS's Independent Lens.
That was my first
I'm sorry,
film, by the
I'm
way.
sorry,
That was
yeah.
my first film that was that. Yeah,
I'm
this is
sorry,
not-
never
these are not
mind.
Vietnam.
My bad.
No worries. It's a long, yeah.
My really bad.
No,
You
no.
want to take over that?
No, no. It's just, my first film was Be Good, Smell Pretty, and that was
Got
about,
it.
Vietnam and grief. And this is about these 3 boys, and they're growing up in Rich Hill, on the edge of poverty.
I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries.
No worries.
I was sort of
'Cause
spacing
I'm
out
like-
too, but
I was
that
reading,
doesn't
I
sound
was
right.
reading, and I skipped
That does
it.
not sound right.
We're all brain dead from the film festival, or some of them took the red eye. I don't even have that excuse, but I'm festive.
Yeah, we can.
But I apologize, because the earlier film won the 2004 Emmy for Best Documentary. That's the important part, as well as Best Documentary from the Los Angeles Film Festival and other awards. And yes, as you said, you're showing Rich Hill. Tracy holds a BA in English from Northwestern and an MFA in screenwriting from USC. You have dogs and daughters, and an
Indeed,
understanding
yes.
husband. So welcome all of you. That was a little long-winded, but I wanted people to know the various backgrounds. We have, I think this year, the most stellar set of panelists in terms of your diverse backgrounds. Just really amazing, and I want to make sure people were aware of that before we begin. So welcome all of you. I have just a couple of main questions I want to throw out and see if, try to get responses variously from you. I don't want to go, from 1, 2, 3 along the line. That's always very boring. I want people to jump in. I'll try to moderate as best as possible. I think I'm going to start with my question. Given I teach documentary class here in this very room, we always struggle with the question of what is a documentary? What are there are so many definitions. People have different definitions. I think already we know Jesse has a particular definition that is perhaps a little controversial today. What are the boundaries of the documentary? We have films like Waltz with Bashir out there now, which is entirely animated, yet it's a documentary. We have American Splendor, shot here in Cleveland, about a Cleveland comic book guy, and that was mostly narrative, but it was bracketed by documentary footage. Films like Zoo, I don't know if any of you have seen that one, but that's an incredible film with where the voices are documentary narration, but the imagery is all recreation in a very odd and beautiful way. So are those all documentaries? Is reality TV documentary? What is a documentary today? What are the boundaries? What do you think the boundaries should be? And then what are the boundaries that you use in your own works? Jesse, would you like to start?
Sure, I can start. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of different variations of the idea of the truth, and I think we're all looking to get at a truth. It might be a factual truth, but it might be an emotional truth, and I think for me personally, I'm looking more at an emotional truth, and I think maybe that bio is a little bit misleading. I mean, the Starfish stories for sure it's very much nonfiction. We didn't really recreate anything or anything like that, but when I approach it, I want it to have a definite POV. I'm not a cinema verite filmmaker. There are those elements, I think, in the films that I make, but I would love to use the aesthetics of cinema, of what's conventionally considered narrative cinema, bring that to a nonfiction storytelling to give the film, a feeling and an aesthetic that brings to light whatever the emotion in that scene is. So I think in that way, where some filmmakers might be strictly, journalism is supposedly about an objective truth. Like I'm more interested in the point of view of a character and what their truth is.
Very good.
Is it a possibility that it's a trope? That there doesn't even need to be truth? That you could just make everything up and the audience will believe it? And then that's a documentary?
Well, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think there's always a question of keeping the audience with you, and to do that, you always you have to create some sort of illusion. Like, we don't just let the camera go and that's what it is. It's like you cut up time and you move things around, and even if you're presenting something that's true, there's always an illusion involved. So I think that the idea of the truth is problematic and also interesting, especially when you're talking about emotions.
So in our film, I thought the best response that we had, this is Rich Hill, was that the subjects in our film, the three boys, said that we had told their truth, that we had told the truth for them, that it was real to their experience. And I think, for me, in making this film, that was very important. But, and that would have been, it maybe would have been something else, maybe more reality TV or something, had we not honored their truth as much. So
I think audiences pick up on that too, because audiences respond to things that are authentic. So, when something's inauthentic, they know, they feel it. And I think that's why I like the idea that emotion is really more truth, honestly, than factual material, because if someone's connecting with it, that means that there's something real and authentic about it.
That's why reality TV is so great. You ever watch Hoarders?
I've seen it.
I love Hoarders.
Yeah.
I think because of the gaze into that world.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think it's entertaining too.
But I think because of reality TV, the audience's BS meter is kind of better, because they've gotten used to like that trickery or the fakery that you see on reality TV. So I think they're a little more, okay, this is not really exactly the truth, and whether or not they're willing to kind of go along with that or be a part of the film's truth, I guess.
Right.
At that point.
It's a choice almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, am I just enjoying this, or am I really buying into it emotionally?
Right.
I think for me, I think so much of it is just the concept of storytelling, and kind of follow up with what Jesse said. For me, I make a very big distinction between journalism and documentary filmmaking, in the sense of documentary filmmaking is a film. So it's privileging story, it's privileging character, it's privileging all that before information. I think information is actually very low on the list. And I actually work also in nonfiction, in fiction filmmaking. I'm also a cinematographer, and I shoot a lot of narrative features. And it's interesting because I approach it the same exact way. It's all about story, it's all about character, it's all about emotion. And for me, that allows me also as a filmmaker to think about things like using music or creating sequences that are more visual. And is that enhancing something that's nonfiction? Maybe not, but it's enhancing the storytelling elements, the art side of cinema, right?
Right.
I think there's a fine line too between sort of innovation and that might feel gimmicky or sort of taking away from your story. So I remember seeing Zoo and being totally blown away in terms of like a really sort of different form of documentary. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, now I'm more in the exhibition world, and I'm watching like a large quantity of films, and to sort of find films that are doing something innovative but still are true to story. Because if you have some new sort of innovation or tactic or strategy, but it doesn't have the kind of the guts of a good story, then it's not going to feel engaging for an audience.
I agree, and I feel like recently there's been a lot of films that have this "is it real, is it not real?"
Yeah, that sort of hybrid
Yeah.
doc.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely interesting as long as it's not just left there.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like
Like-
for me
like-
that's not interesting enough.
Like Catfish.
Well, I'm not gonna
Specific
films,
specific
but what I am
documentaries.
gonna say is, I do agree. There's that concept of playing around with reality, but I think if it's done well in terms of the storytelling and the theme, and then I feel like if it's interwoven stronger, then I think it's really interesting. But I do think it's really interesting how there is that trend right now. I feel like there's a lot of using nonfiction elements and fiction elements and putting them together, and I think that's just because we as a society has evolved enough, to understand media and understand, different types of filmmaking that it can start crossing over into each other.
Yeah, I just hope that that there just will be more and many different kinds of documentaries.
Me
The
too.
documentary won't just be a genre, and then fiction films get to have all different kinds of genres. Like, why
Right.
can't we have a bunch of different,
Right.
documentary isn't a genre. There's just,
I think you're right, and I think that's a natural curve. I think that's the natural curve of any art form, that it starts off being a single thing,
yeah.
but then you get something like Christopher Guest's movies that are sort of that have this tone of a documentary and borrow from that trope, but they're not that. And I think that's really cool, and I think that's probably what the future will be like, especially as the cameras and the tech gets cheaper. That people will just find new ways to do stuff, and that's what's really exciting about the medium.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an exciting time for documentary filmmakers, or just documentaries in general, because of technology is really caught up and so cheap now. We can get those really cool shots and make it look more like narratives if you so want to do that. It's easier to capture things faster, quicker, and better, and so I think there's definitely more of a documentary explosion now more than ever.
To follow up on that, I mean, you're right, like the tools are amazing right now, like dolly shots in documentaries. Like now
Yeah.
you can put a little dolly on your tripod, fits in a tripod case, you can get crane shots with one person where you need like 3 or 5 people to set up this equipment. You can be agile with it, which is really, I think, exciting too.
Yeah, it's all melting together, narratives and documentaries, but the question is, is it all working properly? And this depends on the film, I guess.
And the GoPro, did you see Leviathan?
Yeah.
See, that blew my mind, because they would just drop a GoPro into like a net full of fish. That was a shot you couldn't get 5 years ago, 10 years. I mean,
Can you
like,
explain to the audience a GoPro?
a GoPro is a little camera, maybe about this big, that shoots 1080, shoots like high quality HD. That just was, I mean, you had those little flip cams not that long ago, but they just, for some reason, the GoPro just seems better. So what they did in Leviathan, I think they were anthropologists, right? They were like Harvard anthropologists.
I thought he was
And
a
they-
surfer.
What's that?
I thought he was a surfer.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
And so they just did this movie on a fishing boat, and there is no narrative, no talking, no dialogue to speak of, but they just did the whole thing by dropping little cameras, like on their helmets, in like just dropping in a bucket of fish, so the fish are sliding around, slopping into each other. I mean, I think that's great. I think that's like what the 21st century is going to be like.
Yeah, very good. How about another question? Are there any influences that you have had that you would like to cite? Any particular filmmakers, or not even necessarily filmmakers? What motivated you to get into the documentary form, particularly?
Drugs.
That's an influence.
I actually got into documentary filmmaking purely for the fact that, with narratives, you need kind of, in some ways, you need sets and crews and, actors and all that kind of stuff. And like with documentary filmmaking, you can kind of just show up and, there are your characters, your location's already set, and you're actors already set, and it's a matter of just kind of filming. I mean, you still need some crew and whatnot, but you know, you can kind of make it without having to go through all those other rigors that narrative filmmaking has. And you know, since I had no money, and you know, we had no money, you know, we just kind of started doing stories and making documentary filmmaking. And you know, it wasn't a genre I was necessarily interested in going through film school early on, but then I was like, oh wow, this is really cool that we can find these true stories or interesting stories, interesting characters, and then, you know, move from there.
To follow up on that, and a little bit what you were saying, I also, you know, done work on a lot of narrative films as well, and I've made narrative short films, and I love, you know, the craft of that and the art of that. But what I really love about documentary is that it's a constant process of discovery while you're making the film, that you don't get exactly with a narrative, because you have a very set script. Probably in a documentary you have an outline as well, but in a narrative it's like, you know, line by line. So you have this framework and then you're sort of filling it in. Whereas with documentary, you probably have somewhat of a concept, but there's so much discovery that happens along the way. And that's what's so fascinating to me, is to make a film that you have a question about. And it's this long process of answering that question. So it's fascinating at the same time that you're making something. There's all these insights happening, and you realize new things, and the film evolves as you're making it. And that process is just, I mean, that's why I, you know, love doing nonfiction. I always go back and forth because there are definitely things I love about both, but I love that process of discovery.
I agree with that, and people always ask me like what I see as the difference between working in the two worlds, and I sometimes say I think when you're working on a fiction film, it's all about control. It's about, you know, you have a script, you're trying to, you know, everything that's in front of the screen you placed there, you know, the actors are going to stand in a certain way, perform in a certain way, you're going to show a certain take. Versus nonfiction, for me, it's all about kind of the loss of control. Like something else is happening, and you're just trying to keep up with it, and you're trying to capture it, and you're trying to frame it and contextualize it. You know, and there's something really exciting about that. There's something alive in front of you that you know, it's going to continue without you, you know. And so all you can do is jump into it and try to embrace it.
It's kind of like the art form is just sort of letting it be what it wants to be almost. Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
You
and
do
exciting.
regain that control in the edit.
Yeah.
You do, but
You know, like you have that that sort of amorphous freedom early on, which
Yeah.
is really liberating. But in the end, when you get to the edit, you do kind of retain that level of control or authorship.
you do, but I
Which-
still think you want to, you know, like we try to sort of always let it be what it wants to be through the edit. So I think
Yeah.
I think there's a balance. I think when you try to impose, if you go out, you get what you get, and you come back with it, and that's kind of what you have. So you can try to impose a point of view on it, and of course you should, but at the end of the day, like what you have is what you have, and it's going to be kind of what it wants to be. So I think it's interesting in that way. It's a balance.
It's
you
a
know?
balancing act, yeah.
Jolene? want to say
Oh, sure. Well, in terms of influences, you know, when you're sort of talking about that idea of filmmakers, I mean, initially how I got into documentary was just stumbling into a screening in a museum in Boston of a film about Tupperware, and the idea that a documentary, you know, could make something as mundane and boring as Tupperware interesting was just fascinating to me, and it was like that sort of epiphany where then I was just off and running. But I think in terms of filmmakers, you know, once I was sort of more deep in the medium, and I think Les Blank was a filmmaker who
we just lost him last year.
passed away last year, but is an incredible filmmaker. And I think for those of you who are students, and if you haven't experienced his work, I think it's just, you know, a lot. You can sort of think of it as anthropological, but it isn't. You know, it is and it isn't, and it's humorous, and it sort of takes that idea of like that I was intrigued with Tupperware, of something really mundane. You know, he made this film called Gap-Toothed Women, and you know, it's like the idea of finding something relatable and some kind of
The
beauty.
garlic film, he did one.
Garlic is as good as 10 Mothers.
Yeah, exactly. What I show my students is In Heaven There Is No Beer, which is about polka, you know.
So, you know, I think that was an influence in terms of how I thought about documentary and what documentary could do and the power of the form. And that he was someone who was an independent filmmaker, it's like so much an independent filmmaker till the end. You know, he
He
carried
also
around
did-
a little red suitcase and sold his DVDs at every screening.
And I did tell my students he also did Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe,
Yeah,
for those who haven't
that's
seen that. Yeah. It's legendary, along a documentarist doing a documentary about to other
Yeah.
documentaries.
And
What a
Burden of
challenge.
Dreams about Burn Herzog
Oh,
and Fitzgerald,
Making a-
and like the, you know, how a film consumes you.
Yeah.
But also like blurring the lines and what you can do with documentary. I read about Les Blank when Garlic is as Good as 10 Mothers. He would be in the theater, like cooking things with garlic, and there'd be fans
Sort of
going.
smell-o-vision?
So, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That smell-o-vision. So it's like it's awesome to see like how you can, you know,
love
play with the form.
smell-o-vision.
Yeah, exactly.
Television comes back. Yeah. Excellent.
I like
Great.
that. It's more like installation art.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
I say it also just occurred to me too, like as far as influences, that you know, other filmmakers and other at festivals, you know, has definitely been influences. You know, I'll see another person's film and be like, wow, my film sucks. This is way better, you know, and it's interesting, and you know, so it's cool to see other people's work, you know, kind of first at festivals and see what they're doing, and you know, and other friends and colleagues and stuff like that.
Right.
So that kind of also influences.
Yeah,
future
would you not
projects.
say it's a collaborative form of art? I mean, the fact that you guys are on a panel together, you get to know each other now, and you will support each other at festivals, et cetera. It's a community of filmmakers. It's not each of you against, not against the world, but in the world. You know what I'm trying to say? That you learn from each other and you can support one another.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that, you know, kind of along the lines of what we were saying earlier, documentary sort of historically is kind of stuffy and has to be objective and journalistic, and it's all kind of changing so fast. And people are, you know, people, even in the past 10 years, have done things that have been so interesting in terms of how they're telling stories. I think from the point of influences, it's not as easy to sort of cite filmmakers like you would with narrative. It's more like you see something that someone did with a graphic or like a, you know, getting in a character's mind or something. You're like, wow, that's cool. You know, I want to try and reference something like that more than being like, oh, well, you know, Francois Truffaut, or, you know, some like, you know, more like traditional film reference.
Well, what's interesting is that like everyone has a video camera on their phones now, so everyone is a documentary filmmaker on some level, and I think that sometimes you see stuff on YouTube that's better than what your colleagues are doing, and you just can't help it. I mean, that's just the way it is, and I think that's kind of great. I mean,
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
Like in the
and
golden age of documentaries.
it kind of is in many ways, and it has a lot to do.
I know.
And it has a lot to do with I think just to getting into the hands of the people rather than the sort of elitist approach that you had to, you know, you had to raise money to. You still have to raise money, but you still have to, like, especially if you're using archive, and in my instance I have to use a ton of lawyers. But like, you know, but you don't really need all that to make a picture. And I think that's really cool.
And I think it lets story rise to the top. Then it's about the storytelling more than the craft, because the craft is accessible to everybody. It's really going to come down to is it a compelling story, and how are you going to tell that story?
Yeah, and you can just figure out craft. You watch enough movies, just kind of get it.
And making it cinematic too, because it used to be that a documentary it was not, it shouldn't be, it's not cinematic, and now it's like, well, it can be anything. It should, like, I don't want to watch it if it's not cinematic.
Yeah, amen.
Honestly,
Yeah, it's
like,
true.
I don't care, you know, I want to watch
But
something interesting.
even a great YouTube video could be cinematic.
Right.
You know, I think that's cool.
Well, you always have to get in this mindset, like, okay, I'm going to learn something
Have to
now.
think,
You know,
yeah.
like it's going to be educational, and it's going to feel, you know, like the older school of documentary. So, like, why can't it feel more like that narrative that pulls you in from an
Right.
aesthetic
And
standpoint?
grabs
Like you're
you.
immersed in some
Yeah.
sort of a world.
Or totally stupid. I don't even care if I learn something. Like sometimes I learn something. You know, it's like you know, you could reference the Marx Brothers or something really like that. But a stupid YouTube video is great.
Well, maybe you're learning about people. You're learning about stupid. You're learning
That's
about,
sociology.
You're learning about something.
Well, I mean, that's the whole basis of Winnebago Man, was a funny, stupid YouTube video, and then, of course, you know, went from there.
Yeah, it's
You
true.
know, so-
And that was really great.
Yeah, that was a great film. Yeah, it was really funny and interesting.
Anything, moderator Tracy, you haven't spoken on this topic.
Well, I started out as a writer. I have my graduate degrees in screenwriting, and so how documentaries came to me was sort of by happenstance. I was doing research on the internet, and I kind of took a break, and I don't know if anybody's ever like typed family members' names into a search engine, but I was doing that, and I typed my father's name, and I'd done that a million times before, but up came an account of how he was killed in Vietnam that no one in my family had known before. And when I shared that with my mother and my family, there was just all this stuff started coming up. My mother brought a trunk out of the garage that I never knew existed, and I heard reel-to-reel tapes. She recorded phone conversations with him, and I heard his voice for the first time, and it was just this, I was overwhelmed, and because I had gone to film school and knew it was a very sort of I got a wide education, I knew how to operate a camera, I knew how to, not terribly well, you know, I mean, I did a lot of learning the craft as I go, and when I look back on it, it's like, you know, some of it was kind of amateurish, but, you know, I wanted to document the story. I didn't want anything to get lost, and I was just overwhelmed by the notion that I don't want anything to get lost, and it started very personally, and then grew into something more significant and wider, but that was, and and I looked at a lot of personal documentaries. I was inspired by a lot of people who put themselves in films, and still am very interested in that genre of documentary filmmaking as well. People who continue to do that, like Sarah Polley, or you know, I find them very, very interesting and courageous, because it's hard. It's not easy to do that.
Some might call it documentary as personal essay, the essayist
Sure.
sometimes. as
Sure,
well.
like a memoir or something.
Yeah,
as-
absolutely.
In her film, talk about bending the truth, you know, for Sarah Polley's film.
Yeah.
I mean, that film kind of definitely bent the truth, but it was like, are you willing to accept it? And for me, when I saw it, I was like, I was fine with it, because it served the emotional story, like you were saying earlier, you know.
Very good. I realize too, maybe we should go down the line and say one or two sentences about the film that you brought to the festival, because I was focusing on your backgrounds, and because we have a variety too and I will say, for example, Michael Nuremberg, as I announced, it came from a personal background. Your father worked for Hustler, and so that was very personal. In the case of PJ, I know from his Q&A the other day that he researched his topic. He found 3 different elderly gay men by researching. He didn't know these people, but he went online and wanted to cover, started with institutions that met the needs of the elderly gay population. So you know, it was not a personal story in that regard, but with that in mind, can we go down the line and just tell, like, just about Famous? They may not know what that's about. It's about celebrity.
It's about celebrity
folks.
impersonators. It's kind of a comedic character study of people who look like famous people.
And like yesterday, you had at your screening.
Yes, we have our Hugh Hefner and impersonator and Obama impersonator here as well. Actually, I'm kind of tired because Hef wanted to go to Liquid, the nightclub, last night, so I was out partying with Hef last night, which is funny because I feel like, remember that scene in Jerry Maguire where it's like, you know, here's the picture of Cuba and like Tom Cruise's head is off to the side. Like that's how it was for me last night. They were always like, please go out of the way, because Hef was, you know, all the
And
women.
he looked just like Hugh Hefner. I saw him before I went to your film, and I
Yeah.
wasn't
So did I.
thinking.
Mom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
weren't you like
I was like,
fooled for a second?
you laugh in Tower City. And I was like, I've seen the film.
That's what people were saying at the nightclub
Well,
last
you didn't
night,
even
you
see
know.
the film.
I had
so-
already seen the film.
Yeah.
I was like, I was still fooled.
He was
But
spectacular.
it's very surreal and fun being with them, because I mean, like, people will like, they'll walk by and then they'll kind of like stop and they'll be like, wait, and then this excitement kind of comes up, you know, about them, and
they're
you know, that's what we're kind of hoping to get across in the film, is like the excitement and then just the comedic look, and because their lives really are surreal at times.
Okay. Not a personal quest.
No, I don't look like anybody, so.
Right, Liam.
Yeah, Matt Shepard is a friend of mine. Revisits the story of Matthew Shepard, who was murdered in '98 in Wyoming because he was gay. But it's actually a very, very personal film. It was directed by Michelle Husway, who was a friend of Matt's from high school, and it kind of explores how he was sort of dehumanized as a person when he became this big icon and this sort of figure that people saw as this sort of perfect angelic symbol who was actually a human being. So the story really, the film kind of really revisits the history, and also, you know, allows all the people who cared about Matt to kind of fill him out as a character, and also sort of explore his legacy, which is really amazing.
Very good. Michael.
My dad was the art director of Hustler magazine in the 70s and 80s, and growing up, that was fascinating. And so, you know, like when my son was born, we started hanging out a lot, and these stories, these cokey 70s stories were so good. And so I started filming him, and then next thing I know, I mean, like what he was saying about, like what you were saying about him having to research people. My dad, after he was done with Hustler, was like over it. He didn't stay in touch with anybody. So I went and found everyone myself, you know? And 42 interviews later, then it became a bigger project than I'd imagined.
Excellent, thanks.
I'm actually not here with the film.
Right,
I'm
I
the only one,
understand.
but I'm watching. So I'm on the documentary jury for the Cleveland Film Festival, and I run the New Orleans Film Festival. And so I'm watching 13 films in total, and 3 of them are on film.
Yeah, so my recent film is here, which is called Before You Know It, which is a portrait of 3 gay senior men, and senior as in senior citizens, not seniors in high school, just to be clear. Yeah, but it's really, for me, it's more of a meditation about aging and the aging process and the need for community. And just to follow up with, your comment about me researching to find these subjects, that's true, but actually there is a personal inspiration behind it, and I think there's a lot of personal inspiration behind most people's films. In mine, I would say, is actually my mother. I started having conversations with her several years ago about her thinking about retiring and what that kind of looks like in terms of how your life changes emotionally when you start physically, financially, when you start identifying with a senior population. And so that kind of got the wheels spinning and started, me thinking about, well, what's going to happen when I'm 74, for instance, and what's happening now, who are people who are 74, for instance. So there's definitely a personal, influence there.
Great, thank you. Jesse?
It's funny, we realized on the way over here that the 3 of us have films with 3 central subjects.
Not bad.
Yeah, so mine does as well. This is my first feature, The Starfish Throwers. It's about 3 ordinary people doing extraordinary things to fight hunger in very different ways, in very different backgrounds, different parts of the world. There's a top chef from India who quit a very illustrious career to cook meals for about 400 people a day in his hometown, which he hand delivers. Where I'm from, Minneapolis, it all started with a retired school teacher named Alan Law, who hands out about 1,000 sandwiches out of the back of his van, which he also sleeps in every night. He hasn't slept in a bed in 12 or 13 years. And there's a 6th grader in South Carolina, a girl that started a vegetable garden, which has now grown into about 50 gardens across the states, which all go to help cook meals for hungry and homeless people. And it's really a film about, I was curious about, in the face of what seems like a completely unsolvable problem, why continue on? Why try? So it's about that, and then realizing, it's not about just your action, but the impact can be bigger than your individual action.
Tracy?
Well, Rich Hill is about 3 kids in a town in southwest rural Missouri, and the personal connection for me is that town in southwest rural Missouri is Rich Hill, and it's my father's hometown. I directed it with my first cousin, who, it's our mutual family hometown. His mother grew up there, and my father grew up there. And after my father died, my mother was a working mom, and when school was out, she had to figure out what to do with me, and so I spent every summer and every winter break in Rich Hill with my grandparents. So it was a community, it was like a second home to me. But it's a very impoverished place. It's tiny, and 1,300 people, and over the years it's fallen increasingly on hard times. And Andrew, my co-director, and I wanted to go back and visit families who are struggling and tell their story and give them a voice, and that was the inspiration.
Very good, thank you all. I think I will open it up to the audience now. I might throw out another question here or there, but let's see. Do we have questions? Yes?
So I have a follow-up question on what you talked about earlier. How often do you find yourself divorcing yourself from either a storyboard or shot list to, again, let the story unfold in front of you, with time constraints and budget constraints? How do you manage that on an actual shoot day?
Starting to visualize, you mean, your film?
So you're on set and you have what is your shot list or something that's been storyboarded out. How do you manage that whole day as a director? Because you still want the story to unfold in front of you, yet you want to get done what you need to get done.
I think for me, when I first started, I was more about let the camera roll and just try to grab something. And I feel like as time has gone on, I'm definitely more comfortable with this concept of like a shot list or a concept of having, you know, types of shots that I want. And so for me, I'm very particular about speaking with my cinematographer. I work with a cinematographer even though I am one. I love working with someone who's just focusing on filming, and I tell them the kinds of shots that I want and the you know, the kind of feel that I want from thinking about this moment as a scene, like what's important for me to capture. You know, so if the scene for me is so much right now about loneliness, I want shots that convey that. And I might give some suggestions. And I'm definitely the type of director who will come up to the camera person, you know, my cinematographer, and like whisper in their ear or actually slowly kind of push them to one side, you know, so they start panning, you know, and I'm always apologizing, sorry, but you know, something over here, you know. So I don't really go into it with like an actual shot list. It's more of just, you know, types of shots that I want, and mostly just trying to convey the mood and emotion that I want.
I got a tip for you. I stole everything from Charlie Rose. Like, what I watch Charlie Rose do on TV is he starts off with like what I really want, I put in the middle. So that way, like, I'll throw a couple softballs and get them comfortable with me, and then I hit them with the hard shit right in the middle. I feel like at that point they're comfortable and they trust you, and then you really get something good.
Okay. That's good. Anyone else?
When we were prepping Matt Shepard as a friend of mine, we didn't really have shot lists. What we tried to do was really kind of isolate what our themes were, so that when they were out there in the field, they would know, like, we have XYZ film theme, like our movie was a road movie, you know, and there was a lot of memory. So what we tried to do was we tried to establish themes and establish a visual language. For example, we shot a lot of Super 8, so that, you know, less than making lists, we tried to just really have a, you know, communicate as a group sort of what our pieces of our puzzle were going to be, what our language was when we were saying certain types of things, and sort of nail it down both technically and also in terms of, like, you know, simple stuff like get a shot of a road, you know. And that way, when they were out there and kind of rolling with the punches, you know, our cinematographer Craig Trudeau is amazing. He's very versatile, and he would just kind of roll with the punches and just pick stuff up where he could get it.
Yeah, you definitely have to be on your toes, I think, because sometimes, you know, you get a call, and one time we got a call with from George Bush, and he's like, "Hey, I'm doing this event, and we're shooting shotguns in the woods," and
Not the real George Bush.
yeah, not the real George Bush. But it's like, you know, there's only so much you can
That
play.
your George Bush
Yeah,
looks
well-
just like George Bush.
Yeah,
But you
Oh
don't want
my
to
God,
shoot
with a
Jill,
guitar, and he's a good singer.
Cheney.
that's right, that's right.
So strange.
Um,
Sorry.
yeah, no, yeah, he's really good though. We hope he'd been here, but unfortunately not. Yeah, I mean, because you never know what you're gonna get sometimes. You might go to a location, and, you know, you can only control so much at certain times, depending on your film and your subjects. But you just gotta kind of keep in mind, you know, the aesthetics of filmmaking as you're kind of going along and trying to get those shots as you're going there.
Well, can I follow up? Does anyone have an anecdote of like a total surprise, something that happened on a shoot or something, maybe not even on the shoot, that redirected your story, your documentary in some way?
I mean, we didn't have like a surprise moment, but I would say that, you know, we started off with casting a very wide net. I mean, we started off with themes, like we knew we wanted to tell the story in a certain way. We knew there was circumstances that we wanted to shed light on, but we didn't know who, and we wanted to tell a personal story. We weren't interested in sort of outside experts and statistics. We wanted it to be very personal, immersive, you know, really tell their story from a point of view, and but we didn't know who that point of view was going to be until we met them.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, we met one kid in our first shoot, and then that started to really, when we went home with him, we had a sense like, okay, I think this is going to be this is where we're going to do this. And then we met our two other kids, but at first we really didn't know. I mean, was it going to be from the pastor's perspective? Was it going to be from the librarian's perspective? I mean, we didn't have an intention until we met the kids, and then we talked about it and had a lot of kind of after, you know, and really felt like, yes, if we told it from kids, it would be harder to dismiss the stories, because I think these families often get dismissed like, they're just living off the system, or they're, you know, don't have, you know, a strong enough work ethic or something, so it's easier to just kind of cast them aside. But it's harder to do that with kids. So we figured out, yeah, this is gonna be the hard, and then maybe, you know, it'll have ripple effects
So,
beyond.
so you must have like had an intention though when you were going out that led you to realize that this was the kid though, right? Like you must have had some sort of idea in your mind before you made that discovery, you know what I mean, about sort of what you guys were
Well, we
looking
visited
for?
the school, I mean, you know, it's this tiny place, and so definitely, we would spend a day at the school, and we met Apache, you know, our second cousin is the gym teacher, conveniently. And so we were hanging out in gym class, and there was a, you know, a kid that, just, he looked interesting, I mean, for lack of a better, you know, and we said, who's that kid? And the gym teacher said, well, he just told the principal to F off, and so, you know, we're like, yeah, let's talk to him. That sounds interesting. So we talked to him, and, you know, he was very smart and very soulful, and it was also the middle of winter, and he was like chapped and had, you know, a t-shirt, and it was clear that there was a lot going on, but mostly it was the connection and the way that he talked about his life. He was smart and reflective, and it just, you know, there was something that happened, and you know it when that happens, like,
Right.
okay, you know, we're really interested in him.
I think you inadvertently brought up an interesting point though, which is the location. Because you know how some people get weirded out if you go to their house? And some
If you
people,
what?
some people get weirded out if you plan to be like, okay, should we come to your house? You know, like, and then some people are like, oh, with the lights, you know, it's like a thing. And then other people, it's just easier to find someplace neutral, and you can get more out of them
Yeah.
in that. And that's a very difficult thing to gauge, you know, depending on the person's just how they feel about their environment.
But it wasn't until we went home with each of the boys
In
that
your case, you probably had to though, because that's part of the story.
we did, but when we did, and we were sort of embraced and welcomed, that's when it really clicked, and it was sort of, you know, that's when it was like, well, you know, not only do we want to tell their stories, they want their stories told, and the parents are saying, yes, you know, we're having a hard time, and yes, it's okay to be here, and yes, we would like you to be here, and then when other people thought that we shouldn't tell their stories because we were focusing maybe on, you know, the wrong side of the tracks or something, then we were like, God damn, we're really gonna tell their story. If somebody doesn't want it told, like, that's, you know.
That's the attitude, you're right.
Exactly.
There was, when, in the film that I finished a couple years ago, produced and shot, Asexual, that was about the asexual movement and the idea of this community of folks who sort of were identifying as a movement by the sort of absence of sex in their lives. So, which is very far from your the other spectrum.
No, they're in there. They're in there, surprisingly.
But you know, we had this main character who we identified very early on. He was the person who had bought the domain name asexuality.org when he was at Wesleyan in a parking lot off of someone who had bought up a bunch of domain names. And, you know, he had kind of built this language around asexuality because it was something that there wasn't a language that existed. And he was a virgin, and, you know, we followed him for probably about 4 years. And over the course of our, you know, he's the lead character, he has sex at Burning Man. And, you know, I mean, you're like, how, we didn't necessarily see that coming entirely. And we, of course, weren't there.
Nice anecdote.
But, you know, how do you incorporate that in the story? In the sense that, I mean, he actually is still living as an asexual and has a relationship with someone he met at one of our screenings, and it's asexual. But, you know, how do you incorporate that information? It's personal information. You don't necessarily want to undermine, you know, there had been a lot of undermining of the movement. You know, they didn't feel totally accepted in the LGBT community. And how do you incorporate that in your story? It's difficult.
Have any iconographic people come out as asexual? I know Morrissey,
Well,
you know, speculated, but like.
Morrissey, I mean, I think there was also some Paula Poundstone, but.
Because that gives a certain, like, you know, like some people
There
to
was-
look some
yeah, there
forward
was
to, you know,
someone,
to look at as an icon. And
while we were filming too, here I can't remember which band it was, but there was a lead singer from a band who kind of like said in one interview that he was asexual, and we were like, oh my gosh, you know. But
I saw a question over here.
In any documentary where you're kind of just following somebody's life, or like, especially when you were talking about Rich Hill, I was thinking about this, where it's not like you have the means to just cure poverty. How do you find an ending? How do you decide, like, this is it, and bring the closure to a film where you're shedding light on a big problem like that?
good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. There was no built-in structure or, you know, narrative exactly, and it was, that's a challenge. And, you know, there are some films that, you know, have a built-in structure, like a competition film or something, or a political film where, you know, they win the election or they don't win the election, or you win the competition or you don't win the competition. So, yeah, I mean, we decided in some measure that we would have a device of a year, you know, that would be a year. It actually was 18 months that we shot then, but that comes out as a year. And we, you know, in the editing process, we had hundreds of hours of footage. We looked at it very much like a 3-act structure. You know, we had scenes on cards, and we would try to build it, you know, introduce you to the subjects in a way that we felt, you know, we hoped would bring you closer to them, make you not push them away, and then let their stories unfold. But we hoped somewhat dramatically as the circumstances of their lives were revealed. And pretty much for each of the 3 characters, it's chronological, but what's not chronological is the way that they're woven together. That's, you know, they're not, that was more tricky. So I don't know if that answers your question, but, and because we were taking from a very personal perspective, there didn't have to be a big grand resolution, you know, that was wider. It's more sort of emotional again, and more little, you know, moments of connection, and it was very much about family. So that's what we built our structure around.
Yeah, PJ, could you, I know that relates to your case, you, in one case, the New York sequence, again, these are the 3 trilogists, right? One of your 3 stories, something extraordinary happened, which wasn't quite the end, but it was an interesting arc.
Sure. So one of the characters that I'm following is an activist and advocate in Harlem for an organization called SAGE, which is Services and Advocacy of GLBT Elders. And in the process of me following him, gay marriage passes in New York, and it kind of shifts everything for him because, you know, he's an activist and he's out there fighting for gay rights, yet his partner is not interested in getting married. So it's a kind of an interesting, kind of an interesting tension. And so, but, you know, kind of to answer your question, this idea of like, when do you stop filming? I mean, it's a really hard thing to do because people's lives continues, hopefully, right? And you could, and it's so interesting, it could go on forever. But the way that I look at it is it's almost like a chapter of their life is closing and then they're starting on a new chapter. So I think it's just a matter of figuring out that kind of dramatic structure of what's the theme that you're interested in following. Maybe not even so much the story, but the theme, right? And so my theme with this character was, you know, he was also a product of the AIDS crisis, HIV crisis, where you know, he saw a large portion of his community die off, and so very early on when I started interviewing him, he shared stories about how it was something he never could foresee happening in his lifetime. So I felt like, well, here's another thing that's happening in his lifetime that he never thought he would see or have to wrestle with. So when that happened, I kind of knew, okay, there's another chapter now that's starting, and so I could start leaving his story at that point.
Anyone else on this question before we move on?
I think-
Liam and Matt?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it's it kind of gets right to the nature of what's so exciting about documentary, and that, you know, it really, when it's done well, if it's good, it is a process of discovery. So whether it's a personal filmmaker sort of needing some sort of resolution to something that, like, you know, inspires them or troubles them or whatever, I think that when, you know, it's not enough to just follow someone. You need to follow someone with sort of an intention. And I think if you sort of articulate your intention well enough to yourself, and you kind of try to discover your voice through the process of implementing, your look or how you plan to edit, the whatever you're trying to discover should reveal itself through the edit. And I think that's kind of the magic and really the hard part of the process, because it's really hard work to get to that point. You have to really kind of fight through it, I think.
And not to beat this question down, because this is something I think about constantly, and especially with the new picture I'm doing. And I think that life is really messy. Like, life isn't always resolved like the way it is in a fictional film. Like in a fictional film, you expect a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the ones that don't have an end piss people off. And I think that documentary filmmaking inherently has this problem, because people's lives do continue, and sometimes it's messy, and that upsets people. But what are you gonna do? Fuck them.
Matt?
I was gonna say, I think at the very least, you're trying to look for at least some sort of change or evolution in that person or character, like they've evolved to something along that journey. Hopefully, whether it's a large scale or a small scale, just some sort of evolution from that person, as opposed to they're just the same the whole entire way. Because who wants to watch that?
Or they die.
Or they die.
Yeah.
That works.
That's convenient.
Question near the back?
Hi. This is a technical question. I'm a novice, but I'm wondering how you might handle this situation if it's happened to any of you. Do you ever have, since you're traveling around the country to capture these stories, maybe you only have a day to be in town for an interview, so you look at your film later and you see, oh, the sound was horrible, we didn't get what we wanted, or I don't know, Stevie Wonder was shooting that day, or, you can't use that. Do you ever have to go back out, redo it, or are there other ways around that?
Everything you do should be great. Everything you do has to be great. So if it sucks, you got to redo it somehow. And if you can't redo it, you got to figure it out, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
you want to work with good people, like.
Sometimes you don't know they're not good people until.
That's why you want to ask people, how is, you know what I mean? Like, you gotta ask around.
You live and learn.
You know?
Definitely live and
Yeah, you
learn.
redo it, but go through what you learn. I mean, I did that on my first film. Like, the first shoot was terrible. And it had a look I didn't want, and it was just, and then I looked at it, and I looked at it with people, and I did it all again.
It's
All
tough.
again, the
Yeah.
same stuff, and it was terrible. I didn't want to do that, but I did it all again.
It breaks your heart, but you
I'll
got to
jump
live
in.
with it.
And this is something I tell my students, because so often students come into our school in film and digital media, and they think the first thing they're going to do is going to be their epic, it's going to be their great work that will be discovered. And I'm like, no, it's all a draft. Look at all of your first work as a rough draft, because you're going to be learning and changing, and reshoot it. Do a first version, and then do a second version, and then do a third version.
If you can.
And sometimes you can get creative in the editing room.
Yeah.
Sometimes. One thing I will say really quick though is I think it's interesting because people always think it's the camera that has to be perfect, and actually in my opinion I think as long as you have good sound, you can get
Yeah.
creative with visuals.
Yeah.
You know?
80% of the picture.
Sound is
so-
80%, so as
Yeah.
always make sure you have clean sound.
Totally,
That's
totally.
very
Yeah.
important.
And the other thing is, if something happens that you can't, I mean, also, I'm remembering something that we used where the picture, it was kind of out of focus, but the sound was there, and the moment couldn't be recreated because it was emotional and it was lovely, and we used it anyway.
Yeah.
And there's also very good tech people who are very young and getting started and will work for nothing. They're usually.
Some are in this room.
Where are they?
In this room.
Good question. Where are they? Where are they? I'm at the Wyndham Hotel, so.
In the green shirt?
Yeah, I was hoping the panel could comment on funding and both where and when in the process do you get funding?
Where and when is a really good question, actually. I think, it's pretty much conventional wisdom that you're not going to get rich off documentary filmmaking. So I think you kind of want to be very conservative about when you take money, why you take money, what you're taking money for. So whenever, it's hard, people need to get paid. But my personal feeling is, as a producer, is you kind of want to get as far along as you can before you start taking money, because when you take money, you maybe have to give up control, and it gets complicated. you know, it gets complicated.
It's true, there's a million ways to do it. You know, I did about 70% of the picture myself working in the movie industry in the art departments. And then eventually I got a movie studio. And it was only because I had a whole bunch of it finished to show people and say, this is gonna be awesome. If you don't give me money, you're a schmuck. And then you get other deals, because once you get one, it's like with, you know, it's like with anything else. Once people think you're good, then everyone else kind of thinks you're good. You know, it's like herd mentality.
Anyone else, Jesse, where do you get your funding?
Well, I was going to say, I think it's absolutely a catch-22, and that you have to make something before someone will give you something to make something. So you have to somehow find the resources. Like, I'm lucky, like, I'm able to shoot a lot of the material myself, so a lot of times it was just me, like, going out with these people. Maybe I would have a second person, but to start, you just got to go. I mean, just get hands on equipment, make just whatever you think it's going to be, just make something that gets at the heart of it, or the essence of what you want to make as a larger piece, and then you just need to show that to people. There are foundations, and I think foundations have the least strings attached. There's great funds. A lot of festivals offer funds. I'm lucky in Minnesota and New York, we have something called the Jerome Foundation, but a lot of states also have Arts Board. So we got a little bit of Arts Board funding, a little bit of foundation money, and then crowdfunding is, you know, a really viable thing if you have if you're able to commit to what crowdfunding takes and you have something to show that will draw people in. We utilize Kickstarter as well. So there's a lot of options, and it's just cobbling it together and finding people that believe in your story and will work for next to nothing. Maybe you have deferred payment and say, like, this is what I can offer now. We can give you something else later. So there's a lot of different ways that you have to sort of cobble it together, because more than something that's going to pay you, it is really a habit that you have to support in a lot of ways, at least to get started.
That's true.
So.
And the thing that's important about crowdfunding too is that if you know, crowdfunding is basically, we crowdfunded $100,000 on our movie, and we got to the point where we started to view it not as fundraising but as marketing and as sort of testing our product. And so, you know, if you have something you want to do and you need money and you try to do a Kickstarter campaign for, you know, a bunch of money, and maybe you're not able to do it, well, maybe you kind of reconsider your concept. So there are huge benefits of crowdfunding outside of just capital. There's marketing, there's research, there's connecting with your audience, all really almost as important as the money itself, if not more.
And a good reel. I mean, I had like a kick-ass 3-minute reel, which helped me get meetings, you know, and then once you have something, you can get meetings. Everyone wants content, you know. I mean, a lot of executives will entertain a meeting, even if it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does.
In the green?
Michael, what's in it for a movie studio to support a documentary? Or what's in it for them?
Well,
you don't make money on documentaries, do you?
Well, they can do it. They have ways of doing it. I mean, they're figuring it out too. That's a great thing. Anytime any industry is in flux, you can take advantage of it. I think that in my case, I signed a deal with Epix, which was a big conglomerate of Lionsgate, Paramount, and all these other clowns. And what happened was, I decided, okay, I'll take the money, but I'm not going to change what I'm doing. And then we had a zillion fights. How they're going to make money on it? What's that?
What are they going to do with it?
They're going to broadcast on their shitty channel no one watches. But then I was able to take that and make several good deals because I held on to all my rights. Except for like VOD for like 2 years.
I actually have a question. PJ, was it your film at the beginning? I saw there was funding. I could be wrong. Somebody's film here. Was it ITVS funding?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
My film was, but I mean, well, first of all, funding, I think you do all of it. I think it's very rare to find one film that's funded by one source. It's usually a chunk of it's funded by one source, another chunk, and and you'll take what you can get, right? So, but a big chunk of mine was funded by ITVS.
Can you explain that to these guys?
Yeah, it's the independent television service, which is a funding source for programs that would air on PBS and designed for public broadcast. And it's one of the few things that we have in the United States that is actually, their mission is to fund public broadcast. A lot of other countries have, arts councils in place. Unfortunately, we do not have that kind of funding. Ours is definitely more of a business model structure. So it's one of the few places, and thankfully they fund a lot of nonfiction work. So I would definitely, hit them up. We were funded by almost every granting organization you can think of. We, went out to everyone. And again, I'm making the kind of film where if I go around and say I'm making a film about gay seniors, people are, kind of executive producer types, or people who are more interested in the kind of, film business, or maybe not throwing money at me, but hopefully, hopefully foundations and, and other organizations that are really about promoting, other kinds of stories, other, awareness, things like that will hopefully come, to the rescue.
The one thing I'll add about ITVS is it is a license fee, so just to know that you are giving rights away, you're licensing the rights so you can't explore any other broadcast opportunities.
What does ITS stand for?
Independent Television Service. So it's a license deal, and they even take royalties based on the amount of your size of your budget and the license fee that they give you, the percent of the budget that they fund. But whereas if you just get foundation funding, that often has it's not a license, you retain all your rights, you don't have to pay the money back.
And I think
In other words, big thumbs up.
Yeah. But I think it's important with ITVS too, and you address this, Kim, is just like, you're not going to necessarily get ITVS the first time out the gate. Like, they're really looking for someone who's kind of, who they trust is going to get this film done. Yeah. And,
I'll give you just a little insight though. My first film had ITVS funding. My second film, Rich Hill, we submitted 3 times, never made it past round 1. And now ITVS Independent Lens has bought the film to broadcast it. So it's like sometimes it's just like, what?
And they have different sort of focus. I mean, also from year to year have sort of different focus.
One more thing. I thought of something to adequately answer her question, which was that Hustler has a built-in audience. It's sold in 39 different countries. So if you're a TV executive and you're looking for broadcast rights, that there is a commercial aspect to that. I mean, if some of the other pictures that people are doing are incredible, but they don't have that crossover appeal to the mainstream. I mean, that's too bad. That's a problem in society. That's not a problem, as much as industry. I mean, maybe it is a problem in industry. I don't know, but that's probably a better answer to your question.
One of my class members, Wayne Phoenix.
I have a question, and it ties to the funding issue and also to a little bit of artistic and technical issue. I would like to know if any of you, or all of you, and you just mentioned the word film. Do any of you still use film, or is it all video? And the reason why I ask is because video is a lot less expensive than trying to do film. You have to be a lot less strict with what you're doing, you pay more space, the video is so cheap. So do any of you still prefer to use film? It doesn't matter if it's expense, but just artistic preference.
I think you answered it. It's about expense.
Yeah.
Well, and like we say, I think we're really lucky to be making motion pictures at this time because it's not video anymore and it's not film anymore. It's a hybrid. It looks more like film than it looks like video because we're not shooting on videotape and we're using cameras with sensors that look more like a film camera, and you utilize them like you would a film camera. You set your ISO, your aperture, you're using lenses that film cameras use. And so I mean, I love that about DSLR cameras. We shot everything on the 5D Mark II and III, and you can get that look. So I'd be curious to hear what everybody else thinks, but.
We shot on, we made a decision that was expensive, so we did that, we didn't shoot on film, but we shot on the Red Scarlet, and that's 4K footage, and it's, to store that is, if you have 450 hours of that, it's really tricky media management. So, and also when you're editing, you have to render, it's like, offline with film, you render QuickTimes and you edit with the QuickTimes and then you do your online. So we did something that was not film but still was more expensive and somewhat because we wanted the look, because we wanted it to be beautiful and lush and to give a cinematic treatment to something that often gets kind of more of a TV exploitive kind of look. We wanted something very different, so I don't know if that's...
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I have film portions actually in my film, but it's contained specifically as like portraits, and so I have some Super 8 moments and some Super 16 moments, and I wanted it specifically for the aesthetic because it has a grain and it kind of has, you know, kind of like a living quality to it, if you will. But I actually have shot films before on film, on celluloid, and it's extremely difficult, is what I will say, because you can't record sound on it. You know, so it purely is picture, and after, you know, 10 minutes you have to change the reel, and then what do you do with it? It's big. You know, you need a lot more assistance. I mean, it's great. It's really great if you can afford it and have enough people. But it also changes the type of filmmaking you're doing, because I personally like making the kind of film where it can be one person with a camera, with a microphone, and keep it very intimate. It's very hard to do that if you're shooting on actual celluloid, because then you need a sound recordist for sure, you need an assistant for sure, you know, you need a place where you can store all this film, and it's just, you know, it's a lot less intimate suddenly.
Anyone else on that one?
I mean, intimacy is important in documentary filmmaking, for better or worse. you know?
Yeah, we sacrificed, we had a boom, we used boom and had a sound recordist for the first 2 shoots, and then stopped doing that because the boom just, it wasn't the camera itself, it was just the boom that seems to bring so much interest and curiosity and put people, and it's just, you know, we had to get rid of it.
Did you go to Labs then?
Yeah.
We had lavs and then a shotgun boom on the camera.
So we did, it works fine.
Yeah.
In the red.
How gender friendly and diversity friendly is the documentary industry? I mean, I don't see any African Americans on stage, and is that because they're not really involved in this industry? Do you see any areas where this could improve with women, with men, with old, with young?
I think the industry in general is like, gets very, very poor marks for diversity, and also, you know, women being on equal footing with men. I think documentary is actually better, particularly when it comes to women, than narrative. I think narrative is just, the numbers of directors working in narrative that are not white men is like pretty appalling. But documentary is better.
The barriers to entry, I think, are harder, just talk about women, you know, for narratives, because it's, the budgets are bigger, you know, there's more, so, you know, I think documentaries allow, you know, women can make more documentaries, you know, because the barriers to entry. And I think it can be more diverse, and is more diverse, the documentary world. But I'm interested in doing narratives as well, and it's hard to, you know, to know how to break in. But I think the only thing is to just continue to support each other and continue to do the work. I mean, the biggest thing is to do the work. Like, I've sometimes people ask, there's lots of attention now, particularly about women, and so you'll do interviews about, you know, the state of the industry, and I find it helpful to point out the inequalities, but then I also don't want to just be the bitter one who's waiting for somebody else to give me the opportunities. Like, I want to just like push and keep making film, just doing my work, and also saying it's really hard and I could use help, and I'm just going to keep doing the work. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just do the work, do the work, do the work.
I can't speak for the industry, but I certainly think that anyone who's making a good picture deserves to show it. You know, I don't care who it is.
I would say it's, in my lifespan, it has changed significantly. There is more diversity, and I think, as you guys said, particularly in the documentary world, this has been where people from different walks of life are welcome.
But, you know, I feel like as an exhibitor, someone who, I mean, we get, you know, thousands of films a year for the New Orleans Film Festival, and, you know, it's hard because a lot of them are white guys from Brooklyn. No offense, but I mean, we see another Brooklyn address, we're like, and we know, we're like, another white guy from Brooklyn, and
I'm
we're
only half, though.
but we're in New Orleans, right? And so, you know, we want films that are reflect our community and are of interest to our community. And there are pockets, like within the PBS system, there's like the National Black Programming Consortium, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers. So there are pockets of, you know, organizations that are trying to work on this issue within specifically kind of the documentary field, but they're underfunded. I mean, you know, it's difficult. And for us, like, we this year wrote a grant, and we're lucky enough from the Academy, who I know is a big supporter of the Cleveland Film Festival, the Oscars Foundation. where we specifically got money to bring more support, like all the travel and everything, for more Black filmmakers from around the country to come to New Orleans. And then as part of that, take those filmmakers who are coming to New Orleans and have a mentorship program for local indigenous Black filmmakers in New Orleans to have mentors in from around the, sort of established people who can mentor those folks. Because that's a lot, especially when you're not living in LA or New York. The barriers to entry can also just be about your connections, and having that person that is your mentor and really helps to connect you to folks like like these, and filmmakers or cinematographers who can help on your project are really important. So I mean, that's one little thing that we've done in New Orleans because we feel like it's a real problem and a problem for our community. Louisiana has a ton of film productions. More major motion pictures were shot in Louisiana than anywhere else in the world last year. And like 18 major motion pictures were shot there, and yet we're like, how come people from our community, especially African American young people in our community, aren't getting access to work on those sets? How do we bridge that gap? So I mean, I think it's a real problem, and that's one little thing we're doing, but it's a little step.
Yeah, Matt.
I would say too, I mean, I think you will see more diversity in documentary filmmaking because technology is so much more accessible than ever before. I think those stories will come out and, there will be more filmmakers just because it's just there. There's technology with the cameras, stuff like that. It's all very easy to get a hold of. So I think naturally there will be more diversity, or at least I hope so.
Yeah, me too. Question way in the back. When shooting an interview, what's your ideal number of crew members? Some have already answered that. It's one, but
I like 2 or 3. 2, I mean, just 2 because, like, I'm like an idea guy. I don't like to touch the buttons. I like the Andy Warhol hands-off approach.
or like Errol Morris. Errol Morris does his interviews and he's in another room and he has his Interatron, which is like a
I mean, I understand how the stuff
teleprompter
works.
with his
I
face.
just don't feel like I'm too concerned about what I'm doing with the person.
Yeah.
That I just.
So you want to be personal with the person and have the crew.
And then you want to make small
member
talk with the
handle.
person and get them comfortable while the dudes are setting up the lights and cameras. I mean, that's how it works for me. Other people.
I think the crew's kind of in flux too as you're shooting the film. Like sometimes you have more, sometimes you have less, just depending on what you're shooting and how many people you may need. Like I know you said you were shooting a lot of stuff by yourself, but sometimes there's probably times where, you're running sound, running camera, and you need another person or a couple of people to
Depends
make
on
it
the
happen.
film too.
Yeah. I think you plan for the situation. Like, there's if there's a big event happening, you want coverage, multiple angles, some person.
Yeah.
But for those moments where it's just you want to get intimate, I think it's great when it's just you and the city.
For me, the kind of films I'm interested in, they're really kind of personal and very intimate, and so it's really just me and. I loved working with my co-director Andrew, so me and Andrew would be the best crew, just the two of us.
Right down here.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of time invested in your documentaries, a lot of footage, and you're getting a lot of moments that are very impactful for what you're making in your films, and you've become very invested as its creator, and it becomes emotional for you, and it takes a lot of time. Some of you said a couple of years, sometimes a lot shorter because of gaps, because of people you might have to get the money from and there's a deadline. But is there moments in the editing process when you're looking at the best, most impactful, iconic moments? Is there, I guess, 2 questions, that struggle where you have to cope or let go, as some moments won't be able to make in the final cut of your film and you kind of wish it did and it haunts you, or you're kind of happy it did because the other moments were better than the other ones? And then I guess the other question is, do you feel that you get so invested into your films that you kind of get lost and find yourself actually accidentally scripting something in, or sometimes intentionally, to make it even better than what it is?
I mean, I think that's a question about editing.
Okay.
I think that, I'm not a director. I have no aspirations to be. I'm an editor by background. And one thing that and I mean none of you guys any disrespect by saying this, but one thing that you come across constantly as an editor is that a producer or a director comes with you with a preconceived notion about something that they shot, something that happened, and you kind of see it and you're kind of, you have a difference of opinion. And so I think, that's where a good editor can really be helpful, because if there is something that you kind of have to detach from, they can kind of help you through that, and you can know that you trust them and they have your project's best interest in mind and that they're good at what they do. But I mean, I think I can't speak about how that's sort of painful, and I know that it is because I'm not a director, but as an editor, it's something that happens all the time, and it's just really part of the process, and you want to have someone that you're working with who you trust, but who's also compassionate and can talk about, you can talk it out and feel good about the outcome, I think.
It's absolutely right. Because the thing is, you think you shot the best thing in the world, but it just doesn't fit into the story anywhere. And it sucks. It sucks, and you feel like shit, but like, you get over it.
That's why you have special features on DVDs, right? So you
Oh,
can
yeah.
stuff that in.
And now you can just release them on YouTube for free.
Yeah, right.
I think just one last question. Ellen, hi.
Can you recommend a documentary made by somebody else to us?
What's your favorite documentary?
I mentioned Leviathan. That blew my mind.
Leviathan, is that what you said?
Leviathan, yes.
I have a film that I really liked called Bombay Beach.
Yeah, I love that film.
I really loved that film because for me it was a film that when I saw it, it does kind of blur the line between documentary fiction and nonfiction, and there were moments in there where it was exciting to me as a filmmaker to think, oh wow, you could really blow this whole kind of idea up, in a different way. So
Yeah, that film's amazing.
Broke out into singing and dancing. So wonderful.
Yeah,
So
the director is also a music video director, and so in certain sequences, the subjects of the film do choreographed dances, which kind of express the moment that they're in, which are clearly scripted and staged, but just really, in my opinion, beautifully done. And so it was exciting to see that for me.
Have you folks seen The Act of Killing? Big film from last
Loved
year.
it.
That's another one that stretches things in a different way. Any other recommendations?
Yeah, I'd love to mention two things. One, a feature film that I love that kind of changed my notion of what documentary could be in terms of it's not journalism at all, and bringing cinema to nonfiction is Rivers and Tides. It's a portrait of Andy Goldsworthy, who's an artist that works with natural elements. Just beautifully, beautifully filmed and a great film. And then also, if you all know This American Life, the radio show, they did an amazing TV series for 2 seasons. It was on Showtime and it ended because what they said was Hourglass was like, we couldn't keep up doing both, and it was hard to tell nonfiction stories in motion picture because everything's happening in the past, and how can you do that without recreation? But they did 2 seasons, and those are all available on DVD and iTunes, and I think it's really stellar work.
There's a film from last year that was actually nominated for an Oscar, if you haven't seen it, that I really, really loved, Cutie and the Boxer. And I just feel like it was a story, an intimate story, really great craft, and just a really beautiful filmmaker that got amazing access and told a really beautiful story.
And Hoarders buried alive.
Hoarders. We didn't get to reality TV so much.
I brought it up twice.
Yeah, I know. It's a documentary. I don't know what the hell it is, but we're all watching it, aren't we? We are out of time, but I think there'll be a little opportunity. You can come up and talk to these kind folks a little bit. Bottom line is we love documentary. All the things documentary can be, right? So many different ideas were shared here today on what you love, what you're trying to do. Different approaches, and much optimism, right, you guys, for the future of documentary. I'm excited too. We're all excited, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for joining me. I love it.